Howdy Meeps! Welcome to the Meeple Syrup Show.
Hey! Sorry. Just moving my my camera about. So, welcome to the show. As you notice, there is nobody with pink hair. Oh, there is somebody with pink hair. I totally lied. I didn't see it until because it's behind your headset. But Jesse's not here tonight, and also he does not have pink hair right now. He has blonde hair. It's very different. But Jesse couldn't make it tonight because he left London at 2 a.m. this morning, and he hasn't slept since yesterday morning. So that's where he is. He is asleep. And so,
sorry,
in
Jesse.
his absence, we brought on our resident expert on all things game-wise, Andrew Wolf, coming on from Mondo Games. How are you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Hi, Zach Connolly. Hi to Jamie Jones and Corey Muddleman. Nice to see you all in the mix. I see that Jay is watching as well, my brother from another mother out in BC. So we're all here. We're going to be talking about in-game avatars this week. Kind of this interesting departure from what we normally talk about. And Erica, what do we mean by that?
Well, we're like, how does a game kind of represent you? So, I mean, we're going to look a little bit at the idea that we want everything from like tokens, circles, little colored objects. And I mean, obviously they'll still exist today, but then different ideas of how that evolves or how we want to represent or see ourselves in a game. And that can be anything from being a cube to being a full wizard mini with like flames flying out of your hands.
Okay, just before we start, is there an airplane going over somebody's house?
Yeah, there's an airplane or something. What is it?
It's my house.
Okay, I gotta say, Andrew, you might want to mute yourself when you're not talking.
I can do that.
Sorry about this.
No worries. Sorry. Where's the mute button on here? Sorry.
Where is it on this one? Have we done this before?
I don't know. I have a mute button for you. I can mute you myself. Boom. Now you're mute. Ha! But now you're on.
Sorry.
Well, now it's really quiet. That was a very
it's gone back to normal.
apparently.
Okay.
So
it went over pretty quickly.
We'll see what happens. So, Jamie Jones says hi, Andrew.
Hi, Jamie.
Let's talk about in-game avatars. So, historically, if we look at I call it the history of avatarism. I don't think that's actually the word for it, avatarism.
Sure.
But we'll call
now
it that for now.
somewhere because you invented it.
Yeah, right. What's the first time you remember a game having little pieces that were people or that represented you in a game? Andrew, what do you think?
Actually, I can remember all the way back to, I think, what was my first memory playing board games, Chutes and Ladders. Like, we were all starting at the bottom of that, or you guys call something different, don't you?
Snakes and ladders.
Snakes and Ladders. Right, but we were all playing as those children trying to ascend up to the top of that game board. And I mean, I now still have a visceral memory of like moving my little piece up the little ladders and sliding him back down the chutes. So, very early on, I mean, you could go back to things like Candyland as well. It's like we are represented in some fashion by an avatar, a character that represents us in some setting, whether it's climbing up and down chutes and ladders or running around a candy kingdom. So it's kind of baked into gaming from the really initial experiences that I think we all have as kids.
Mm-hmm. And Erica was mentioning some before we started the show that were actually like super poignant when she mentioned it. It's like, oh my gosh, yes.
So I think this is a really important. We'd like to trash a certain game in the hobby world, and I think maybe a little unfairly, but I think this is a great time to talk about how much it shined and probably changed a lot of things, and especially a lot of things within, the whole line around this kind of did the same thing. And I think that's Monopoly. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the times you think of yourself as being like a colored peg moving around a board half the time, right? You're represented just by a color. How many people have a favorite token in Monopoly? The idea of the actual physically shaped object that people will fight over Not like
yeah.
I get color fights, but usually like you can see color fights.
Oh,
No,
God.
I feel like
Jones, I'm the dog. I am the dog.
that's
I
it.
will
Like
fight you for the
everybody's
dog.
like guaranteed that you have
A
a thing
car.
that is your Monopoly piece. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I don't think that necessarily gets enough credit. Yes,
But the-
it's a track move, but I mean it's one of the original track moves. So,
Yeah.
but think about like what that means.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And how many other attachments we have to a game at that level
Right.
because of a token, because of your avatar.
Yeah, and the other one that you mentioned was Life, the game of Life, where you might have a different colored car, but you're putting those little pink and blue pegs in your car.
Like how genius
Means
is
something.
that?
It literally means something. I mean, obviously there's some gender stereotypes in there, but still.
Yeah. And then we were.
Sorry, Nate Murray is saying, take the horse with the iron on its shoulder and make it a knight. Okay. All right. Thanks, Nate.
Yeah, and to that degree, also Clue, and I think Clue is interesting because it takes it even a step further because you actually are playing as a character. You know,
Yes.
you are Professor Plum, you are Colonel
You could
Mustard.
have done it.
So
Yeah.
you are taking on a role in that game and not just saying, well, I'm the thimble or I'm the horse or I'm a little car. It has, those characters have personalities baked into them and people have associations with them. So yeah, I mean, it's baked into
so
all
much
the
so that
classics.
they've made movies about them. Right?
Good movies.
Mm-hmm. I think they're making another one.
Are they?
Yeah, I think they are.
It's a cult classic, so why not?
Right. Corey Muddleman is saying Hero Quest was his favorite avatars when he was growing up. If you haven't played Hero Quest, it's like the kind of quintessential primordial dungeon crawler type game out there. So it's
Corey,
one
I want Corey to tell us what the best thing about Hero Quest is.
There are so many good things
Hero
about Hero
Quest.
Quest.
Is
That's
this
a
like a
strange
trick?
question. Yeah.
Okay, we'll find
right.
out what the answer to that is shortly.
Yeah, so people in the feed, please give us your answer. What is your favorite game piece to use as your avatar? All through the night, we'll be posting those up on the screen. So we talked about Life, we talked about Monopoly, even all the way from checkers where you have little round discs. But
I guess chess might be a good evolution of how that really is different, right? That idea of that visual representation, and I think that, and I think we'll talk more about this later, but almost like that tactileness of like those pieces and the actual size differences and what that means, and I don't know, it's very maybe you get right away what you're supposed to be seeing.
Yeah, it's like the original tabletop minis war game, right?
It is.
Kinda, yeah.
I mean, obviously games existed before that, like Go, but I can't think of a game before that where the pieces were actually sculpted and they had unique characteristics to them. I mean, so much so that now, I mean, there's a whole industry around custom chess games too, using favorite themes and licenses. So people love to immerse themselves in any way you can get like sculpted pieces on the tabletop of your favorite characters. You're going to immediately be more engaged in what's going on in front of you.
Wait, why do you think that is? Why is that so important to people?
I
just think there's.
Yes, go ahead. Like originally, I was gonna say I think a big stem of this might even be somewhat connected to like why people like to RPG, but at the same time to then have an actual visual representation in front of you on what that stands for. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think we like to have this imagination or projection of like what we are, what I mean? Especially like, and this might be another topic to get into as well, is the idea that if I want to have a very thematic or immersive experience, I need to see myself as something. So it's not that easy to do when you're just a colored piece. But if I have a physical object that I'm looking at that says, like, for example, a knight in chess, I'm seeing that horse and what that represents, or I'm seeing, kind of like that piece as like that's who I am right now.
Right. Oh, Andrew's audio is quite loud. It's okay. We still like him. Andrew, what about you? Why do you think, or do you definitely need to have an avatar in a game, and what does that psychologically mean to you?
Yeah, I definitely prefer to play a game where I can take on a role, and whether that's just a player board or card in front of me to at least give me some idea of what I'm doing in the game, but even more so if I've got some kind of piece to create some emotional resonance for, it's going to be a more immersive experience. And I know I talk about that all the time when I'm talking about game design and creating immersive experiences, but every touch point that you can create from the art, whether it's just a card in front of you or a sculpted piece that you're physically manipulating on a board, I think it helps draw people in. So I'm always going to lean to something that allows me to better immerse myself in the experience. And I think the experience is always better for it.
Okay, cool. I always thought that, see, I'm not one of those role-playing gamers that needs a miniature on a board somewhere. I actually hate that. I'm more of a put it in my head and I'll do it all in my head. Yeah, I don't like them. I don't like fourth edition for me was like the worst of all the D&Ds because it basically made it into this tactical war game instead of a role-playing game. Not that D&D originally wasn't a tactical war game, because Chainmail totally was. But the idea of having an avatar for me, I find it deeper in my head than I do on the board. But I think that it's very valuable on the board. I'm just looking at my hair because something happened to it. It's very weird. It's very flat. I should put a hat on. See, if I had an avatar, it would have better hair than I would. So yeah, let's think about what do we use in games right now, and what's the difference between like a pawn, a meeple, a standee, and then the minis, the all-encompassing minis that we see, just plaguing Kickstarter like some kind of zombie horde. What do you think? What's the difference between them all, that we can define them for our viewers, and then when would you use each one in a different game and why? What do you think?
All right, what level of basicness do we want to start and then work our way up?
Okay, let's start at pawns.
Okay,
Are pawns different than meeples?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yes. In physics, I mean, you know what the one nice thing might be is that I think pawns at their core are supposed to represent a somewhat vague human figure, and then meeples took it to that next level and actually became humans.
They added the arms.
Like it's no more like it's that one less level of abstraction that you know what I mean. Like it really is like a pawn is just a head and a body, and then even though we now consider meeples abstract, at least meeples are physical people.
Right. And then meeples, I guess, are going to be those like three-dimensional, but really two-dimensional extruded pieces of wood that can stand up on the board, okay,
or lie down, or whatever,
or lie down like a, as a farmer might, lie down in the fields to collect points, and then
all those lazy farmers,
right? And then now you see though that we get sheeple and we get cow eeple and carrot eeple. I'm sure I have fish eeple right down.
Can I say there. I love it. That is an awesome trend that we can basically create flat wooden representations of almost anything.
And people go
crazy.
They go loopy over them.
They do.
And then with people like Meeple Source, screening their meeples with like pictures and items.
They have clothes.
Right? And I mean, the first time I saw that really well done was like the stickers in Rampage in Attack on Meeple City, Terror on Meeple City.
So they all look different. Yeah,
they all look different. That was super cool. And so I think that that's taking it to the next level, right? And so do people want more representation of that kind of image on their board game table? Or is a meeple enough? Or is a pawn enough? And then we get into standees, which are sort of these in between meeple and miniatures, right? Because they're still flat. In fact, they're very, very, very flat.
But you have art.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gives you a chance to profile art in a way that you can't do. You can't even profile the art in the same way with actually fully rendered 3D pieces like you can with standees, because unless you take it to the degree where you're going to actually paint them and do a lot of that work yourself. But you get full color, full illustrated, with a lot of personality art through standees that, they're more cost effective. You want to get into the discussions of, where do you want to spend your money? But the art itself can really be featured in a significant way on a standee that you really can't do with a meeple or a pawn. And but you don't have to put all the work in that you generally would have to with fully sculpted and tooled 3D pieces that generally have to be painted on their own. And I mean, I don't know if we want to get into the whole idea of the hobby, the craft side of it, and what.
For sure.
Well, I think we'll get there. We start talking about like
that's
war
definitely a part of it, right?
I think that's a huge part of this evolution of that happened there.
Yeah, so let's talk about standees for a bit longer because I find them super cool. So a lot of people have been, making standees. I mean, what is the first standee that you remember playing a game with when you were a kid?
It's not my first, but one that I always find funny because this game is like horrible. For some reason, I used to play it all the time. There was this really old Ninja Turtles pizza game.
Oh yeah, I remember it. Yeah.
And we used to fight over which Ninja Turtle to be, but it was a stupid standee.
Yeah.
I remember, I think a lot of licensed games back in the day that were sort of still mass market ones would use standees for the characters because it was just much more cost effective. If you look at like the stuff
character.
But you get the art. So if someone's making a game with superheroes or Star Wars characters, you want to see those characters, and they weren't going to spend the money back in the day to put fully rendered 3D characters in the game. So standees were a great way to get your Spider-Man or your Luke Skywalker or your Darth Vader in your game, so that you could actually see on a tabletop that visual that you have in your head.
That's really cool. Jamie Jones is just saying that Stratego uses standees, and he's right. And they use standees in the best of ways because they use standees to obfuscate the information on the other side of it. And then that's been, extrapolated into like Columbia Block Games, War Systems, where you can actually use the standee and rotate it, to rotate the standee to show how many hit points are on that particular unit, though you don't know what type of unit it is because you can't see the attacking side. So that's cool. That's actually design worthy. The other thing I've seen lately is see-through standees, where
the acrylics.
Where they're acrylics and they have really nice outlines, which is fine, and they're usually die-cut outlines. But then all the art is as if it was not on a background, so it's like it's floating in space, which looks really great. And the other thing that you can do with the art that you can't do necessarily, or maybe don't want to do as much with stickers on a meeple, is you can show the front and the back really easily. And I think that's also kind of interesting and might be more interesting for something where facing is important. And it's very much a real facing versus a meeple. Well, meeples have facings, but a pawn, like a round pawn, it's hard to have a facing on there. And even for some of the war games that are on round bases, it's depending on if you're using facings and front firing arcs and stuff, you have to notch a base or something like that to show that type of thing. Whereas a flat standee, you can do that with. So I guess now, a lot of the anime games have those now, the flat standees that are see-through.
Well, and now I think the technology for making chipboard that you can punch out and assemble has gotten a lot better, and people have experimented with a lot more. So you can do multi-piece chipboard standees. So now you actually get some more dimensionality out of it. I'm thinking about like Bosk, you have your trees, but which are standees, but they're standees, they have a crisscross section, so they create more of a dimensionality. They don't have to be flat anymore, but they're still, I would call them standees.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, essentially they are, because they're play pieces. They represent you. You know what I mean?
Your trees.
Your trees. You're a whole flock of them.
I speak for the trees, just like the Lorax.
There you go.
Here's the thing. Zach Conley says, I'm so over minis. I want standees with gorgeous art and lower the cost of your games. Minis always feel like an Etsy project. That's a funny thing.
Do we want to talk about cost now?
Yeah, sure. Let's go into all about the minis. Let's talk about the minis. Erica, what do you got
All
for
right.
us?
I was gonna say, why don't we at least start with, I think the credit where credit's due for this sort of thing where it exploded. And I think a big part of this is Warhammer. I think a lot of what we're seeing right now that's considered almost like standard is really from them. And that's like the birth of Simon in tons of ways, like all that, just that like minis culture that grew up around like people investing in like whole armies and what that meant. And like, I mean, I remember I had a lot of big Warhammer friends growing up. I used to help like train boards. I wasn't into the minis. I was into like I did them for competitions. I never actually went to. They took them. I was like, I don't know. They never invited me, but I made boards for them. Anyway,
Poor Erica.
I don't know. It's just my life growing up, I
So,
guess.
for those of you out there who are going to go play Warhammer, invite Erica. That's what she's saying.
So, okay, this is the mini side. So you know, I don't know if it still exists, but there's technically an actual character named after me in Warhammer.
What?
Okay,
Wow.
so my friends growing up, and what one of them though is like, because the internet and things, chat rooms and things, was a friend from Germany too, and so they invented the Tyranids,
Oh,
and
Okay.
so which eventually got attached to the universe, and so the one of the queens in the Tyranids is the worst possible way to spell my name, but it actually is Erica, but it's ArykkaH. So, but it's the Queen Erica.
Wow. Really?
That's me.
I'm gonna have to Google that later.
yeah.
I don't know if it still exists. It did, but this is like, I don't know, when I was like 16,
Right.
17, something like that.
Well, but I think to pivot off your point, obviously Games Workshop and the Warhammer universe had a lot to do with the explosion of minis. But I remember when I first started doing RPGs, way back, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago, the D&D minis were a huge part of it as well, and as an extension of the experience and the craft. And I know, you said you don't really prefer to play RPGs, tabletop stuff with minis. You'd rather just kind of imagine it in your head.
Yeah.
But I remember when I first started doing role-playing games that a lot of times I think I would actually get inspired to make a character based on a mini that I saw that was cool. When I just remember going to the hobby shops and looking through all the pegboard racks and finding all the different characters and like, oh, this is a cool figure. I want to play this guy. And then going back and saying, okay, figure out what that character is. Was he, a paladin, or was he a wizard, or was he a thief? And I'd be interested to hear what everybody's thoughts are about the craft of minis and how that influences, I guess, their decisions and their experience in the game. Not just in having it on the table, but assembling the pieces, painting them, customizing them, that sort of as an extension of the expression of yourself.
Oh, that's a fair point. It's like it's multiple experiences at once.
Mm-hmm.
If you're someone who is a minis painter, because we just had a comment, I don't know where it went down, someone saying, but minis are so much work, you have to paint them. And so obviously there's two sides of the fence where it's like you have to do that, or like, yeah, I get to do that. And I guess it depends on where you fall, because if you're into the painting of them, then I think you have multiple levels of enjoyment that you're getting out of this. And you might, like, whatever you thought of the game or the experience or whatever, it's like combined over all of it, it's that much more, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I guess
it was,
yeah, sorry.
It was for me, definitely, when I was playing D&D, I enjoyed actually painting my figure and like making it even more personal, just by picking like what color was the outfit going to be, how did I want to depict everything. And then when I got into doing Games Workshop stuff, I've really enjoyed the craftsmanship of it. I loved painting minis, and I mean, I got pretty good at it, so much so that people would commission me to paint their stuff. I was terribly slow at it, so I probably got paid at the rate of like 50 cents an hour and how quickly I could paint stuff and the going rate for things, because nobody wanted to pay a lot back then. It's like, I'll give you, $5 a figure, $10 if it maybe was like a mounted figure and you had to paint a horse also.
That was dark horses.
Yeah, so I got to the point where it's like, just let me paint your general, or let me paint your standard bearer. That's all I want to do.
I mean, I
think that the craftsmanship of it was a big part of it.
I had at least 3,000 points of Space Marines. That's a lot of Space Marines.
Space Marines were very popular.
And they were the Primer Grey Legion for many a year. Because I can't paint. Well, it's not that I can't paint. I don't have the patience to paint.
That's
and
right.
it's not that I don't have the patience to paint. Really, it's that I'm a perfectionist, and it's really hard to get your miniatures done well and quick and fast and like all those things, combining into that perfect Venn diagram. So I would just paint somebody. I would pay somebody who was much better than me and also had an airbrush to do my painting. He actually now works for the company that makes catacombs. And yeah, he would paint all my stuff, my friend Henry, and he was happy to do it, and I was happy to pay him because I just wanted to play. What I love doing with miniatures, though, and like Eric, I was a terrain builder. I built all this terrain. Love doing that. But I liked kit bashing. I liked taking the Marines, like adding stuff to them, and that to me was personal enough. So yeah, that's my tech Marine with the extra arm off his back, and
then people they had to make mod rules because of people like that.
No,
you know what?
No.
I think they did, but I think that it actually that I think is what becomes really cool about it is that if you are this represents your army, you do want to customize them, and I get that people started. Yes, it's part of the game. You have to be careful about what you add, and there came down to a whole percent of certain figures, and it has to be a certain percent of that figure to count. It got silly, but I think it's because people worried the rules would be broken. It's kind of just let it be that character. Do you know what I mean? You added a little extra. I don't treat it differently, but I mean, I guess that comes down to, can you make up your own stuff, or are you supposed to stick with the rules?
Well, I mean, it was a really interesting thing back in the day in the Warhammers. When Warhammer was huge in the 90s, there were standing rules in terms of not only from Warhammer headquarters in terms of what stores could carry. So stores back in the day, if you carried Warhammer, you had to carry a shelf of each thing. Just because the people in your area wanted to play Eldar and Orcs and humans, that didn't matter. You still had to carry Chaos Marines. You still had to carry at least one of each model. And every time you ordered, they would check to see, well, you don't have this. We're just going to add it to your order. And it became a really big sticking point in the industry in terms of sales and things like that. There's also, Forge World. If you know Warhammer, then Forge World is the next level of Games Workshop stuff that you can't get. You cannot actually get it unless you go to official tournaments and conventions and things like that to get these extremely highly detailed, very expensive models that nobody else is going to have, but they're official and they have stats cards and things like that. So that's what a lot of people will do as well. It's the kind of game where you can buy your way into, a good army versus, because the rest of it's really luck. Well, a lot of it's luck. It's thousands of dice flying across the table. There is some skill in terms of,
your stat balances and things, yeah.
Well, that and the army building is so meta and fun, but you have to go from the eye view of the miniature, right? So your line of sight is traced from the miniature's eye line, pretty much. So you're kind of doing all that kind of stuff, which is more of a physical spatial rotation, spatial distance skill. And that's kind of interesting. And I think that's the only reason why miniatures mechanically can be any different than a lot of the other ones, right? Is there a mechanical difference between miniatures and a standee? Only if the game rules state there is, right? So, Andrew, have you played X-Wing, Andrew?
A little bit, not that much.
Eric, have you played X-Wing?
I've only really watched it played. I haven't played myself.
Okay.
Are you getting to the idea that because there's an actual physicality to the pieces on the table, it changes the experience, and the rules are actually crafted around the physicality of it? I think about things even Heroescape, anything that has anything and elevation and height,
what
stuff
their abilities are.
Yeah, now the actual physicality of the figures matters in that, can somebody see over a hill? Can somebody scale something in one leap, or do they have to take two movements because of how big the piece is?
Yes.
That's something that miniatures do that I think is interesting and unique that you can't really replicate in any other way, is by having an actual physicality. Now you can make that impact the game in interesting ways.
Right.
things like range and height, and the differences between the actual physical representations on the table.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Jamie Jones is talking about Gaslands, which we had talked about a little bit before too. Maybe before the show started, that Gaslands is a game where you use like Mattel Hot Wheels cars and stuff like that, and you kit bash them. You add weapons and ram plates and armor and extra gas and all that kind of stuff to these kind of post-apocalyptic Mad Max style cars. And other than that, it's just using a template system that is very similar to X-Wing. And that is another really fun way of getting involved in miniature gaming, because it's not as necessarily expensive. Just go down the street to a garage sale or to a thrift shop and buy all the old Hot Wheels, because you're going to bang them up anyways and gridify them. So there's some neat stuff though.
Well, something else that just occurred to me,
Yeah.
that miniatures, or actually like figures on a table, it being involved to create a unique experience, is something like Flick 'em Up,
Right.
where that now everything has a physicality to it, and your piece, your character on the table running around, going into the saloon, or in and out of the bank, and actually having to physically interact with the pieces that you flick at them is a different extension of having an avatar on the table, and creating new game systems around that aspect.
Right.
It's funny you said that, because I think David just posted you can't flick minis or something like that. Like as an experience. I bet I think there's something along the lines of that. I was like, it's funny.
He said you can flick a standee, mini not.
I think he meant maybe had more of anger. I wasn't sure, but yeah.
Well, you can even flip them now too, right? There's like flip ships.
Yes, there's, but that's more of a shape thing.
That's just a piece of cardboard, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, but that's your ship, right?
Yeah.
As a standee.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, what's interesting is like it's great that we can like come up with mechanical differences for like let's say the abstract versus like the more realistic minis kind of idea. But what another interesting thing is I think whatever you represent yourself as an avatar in a game already kind of makes or tells you a lot about what that game's going to be about. Like, I think we make a lot of assumptions about a game immediately when we see what kind of player pieces we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how much that is natural or how much that is because of previous games. Like, if you walked up to a game and you saw just a whole bunch of colored meeples, you'd already have an expectation that would be very different than if you walked up and saw a bunch of different minis. And it, funny enough, could be the exact same game.
Yeah,
but the feeling would be, So I wonder where that factors in and where that maybe came from.
Well, I mean, again, probably from historical use of miniatures in like Napoleonics, in war games, in Warhammer, all the way up there, where there tends to be this linkage, anyways, in gamers of our rough age, in the 30s and 40s and 50s, of years of age, not when we were born, that link like miniatures to war games and war games to randomness and dice, and range finding and all that type of stuff. All the the trappings of a tabletop war game. And so now that we're seeing them, in miniatures in board games where that kind of stuff isn't necessarily there in the same mechanical sense, I think the sense that it's probably shifting towards, what style of game is it? Although you'll find a lot of people who, might be more quote unquote Euro snoots who will like say, no, I always prefer wood. I'll always want wood over plastic. Always wood over plastic, right?
I think a big part of that is when you think about Euros, like we really are going back to that abstract idea. And at its core, it's a lot of the times that is its aesthetic. Like it might have a very, it could have a beautiful box, but most of what's inside the pieces, the tangible pieces, have a very abstract feel. Like as we said, they're cookie cutter versions of something or something to represent that. That I feel like that's sort of what they now represent. That if you took that away, I think then people, as I said, it doesn't feel right. It's like it's become such a connotation to what that means.
So are we looking at the spectrum from like super abstract to super concrete, with the miniatures being like super concrete?
I think that's pretty concrete.
Right?
I'm telling you what that looks like.
Meeples being somewhat more towards the abstract, or maybe even the middle.
Step above a disc.
Yeah, right. It's a step above a disc. Here's a neat one. Zach Connolly said that item meeples just didn't land for him, which are the ones
ones with
from
the stuck
Gamelin
Yeah.
Games, where they had little, almost like Lego-like hands where you could stick things in there. And he's saying they didn't really work for him. What did you guys think of them? Did you ever play with any games with the item meeples?
I played with the
I did.
meeples, not the games.
Oh, you played
Yeah.
with the meeples, but not the game itself. Okay.
But that's bigger part of
Yeah.
the point is maybe when does it become a toy?
Or a gimmick.
Right.
You know, well, and I think that it lends to the interesting question of when do people choose to include minis in games purely to elevate the perceived value of the game, when people could say, I could have played this game and had standees or cubes or whatever, and I would have had the same experience, but you wanted to sell me a $60 game instead of a $20 game.
Right.
And how to, in this day and age, how do people feel about that, both from the design side, but on the consumer side as well?
Zach Connolly is saying it's a big gimmick.
So, and in some things, I think that's true. I think what's happened is it's when markets reverse themselves. So I think people were dictating the market, and they were kind of saying, minis. We love these things. We love the Flash. We love this. And then finally publishers are like, okay. And then they all started doing it. And we're like, wait a minute. They don't all need minis. It's like, you've got to take it back. And so I think that also becomes then we, again, are we saying that purely from a cost standpoint, or is it, there really is something we intrinsically feel about certain different types of avatars saying, well, that's what this type of game is. I wonder how much of that is really a factor.
Or to your earlier point, you create a company like Cbon where they've created an entire business model around the minis, even so much so that it's like baked into the name.
Right.
And you have to look at what they're trying to do now, and say they feel like they're either forced to put minis into games where maybe you didn't really need them. Like for example, I know Wacky Races I think just came out.
I think they're coming out,
or it's coming out very soon. And I played it, and it's fun. Would it be just as good if you had flat pieces with art for the different Wacky Racers or standees instead of having all these fancy minis? The minis are great, and the game is fun, but could they have gotten away with not doing it, or do they feel stuck because that's the expectation for their brand?
Right.
I would say just for that example. Maybe for other things don't need minis, but for that example, you've taken a classic franchise that doesn't have any product. And again, maybe we're talking about toys again here, but it doesn't, but it still has a huge nostalgia factor of people who couldn't get these figures when they first came out with the Hanna-Barbera ages, right? So all of a sudden you have this chance that in one go in a box, you have every one of these characters that you liked or grew up with, and now you have a representation of them. And I would say for other things, absolutely. And I mean, even to that point, I think that's why Cmon is trying to expand their brand to have other lines in it because of this mini limitation where they want to be like, okay, we need something that doesn't have minis. We need lines that can do that. We can't always be doing minis.
Right. But still lines that keep with their not necessarily toy factor, but table presence factor, right?
Yes, they're still looking for table presence, and I'll be fair, they're kind of looking for toy, but it's just where everyone's going. Like everyone's going there. People want to say like, okay, well, I need a line for almost every type of person, right? But yeah, I think there is something to that more and more there are games that are becoming kind of like a way of getting merchandise in its own way, or like a collectible set. And I mean, you're always hoping the game is good too, but I don't think there's necessarily, we can't discredit that because obviously that's filling a need for a lot of, you know what I mean? Like it's its own thing, I think, at this point. Maybe slightly separate from minis. Sorry.
Well, no, definitely when you look at what some companies are doing, and I mean, Andrew works for one of those companies. That hinges on nostalgia in a way, right? That there's definitely, absolutely. There's a target market out there right now of people who are in their 40s and 50s with disposable income who want something from their childhood. So hell yeah, we're making He-Man the game, right? That was a guess. I don't know that for sure.
We are not making He-Man the game, but to your point, things like that definitely are in our wheelhouse. And what we did, a couple years ago with the thing, Infection Outpost 31. Actually, that's a really good point, because I remember when we were developing that game, I asked everyone, because that game has minis. Like, you have a character, it has a little mini, and I said, but it's a social deduction game. And the mini just represents like a location that you're in, and you just kind of bounce back and forth. So does that game need minis? Probably not. But when we talked about it during development, everyone said it's going to add to the experience. So even though it might feel a little bit that's a hard word to say, superfluous. It's good to add value to the experience, not just add value to the product itself, but actually add value to the experience. And I think that's where you have to ask yourself, if I include a mini, something that feels a little bit more immersive, does it fulfill that promise of creating a better experience? And I think in the end with the thing, it did. Because does it serve a huge role? No, but does it make it an elevated experience? Yeah, I think so.
We did the same thing with Big Trouble in Little China, right? When Big Trouble in Little China came out from Everything Epic, so Daryl and I did a lot of the development on that. Like those miniatures, they could have been standees, they could have been flat pieces of cardboard, but people really wanted the miniatures because there's never been a thing at all for Big Trouble in Little China until the card game came out and that board game came out. So, and that was in there at the right age, like 40 years old, 45 years old, people who are basically going through their midlife crisis, if we want to talk about that, oddly enough, who are like, yes, I'm going to reinvest in my childhood. I love that movie when I was 12 or whatever, and like,
hey, I love that movie when I was 12. I'm not in midlife crisis.
You're getting there.
Okay. It's coming, people. It's coming.
A couple of things. Ming Yang Lu said, you mean like the TMNT game with a bunch of unnecessarily duplicate minis and cost $200 all in one go
they were, some of those minis were cool. Some of them were just too much, too many.
Do you think it just is indicative of sort of chasing the trend, especially on Kickstarter right now, where to garner a lot of attention, you have to throw a whole bunch of plastic in a box?
I definitely think it's a model.
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder for certain Kickstarters if it's kind of like more minis make it seem like some super exclusive, like it's just something so grand rather than just yet another common game.
Yeah. At the risk of annoying James Hudson, who's a very good dear friend of mine, I think
we have to say it because it was talked about a couple times.
Here we go. The Grim Forest did not need minis and should have been half the price, says Jamie Jones. And then up here we get Zach saying Grim Forest was fun, but could have been a box of cards. With that said, they keep the price way down.
Oh, I have a good example of that.
Yep.
Sure.
And then Jamie Jones says, agreed. I just never took 90% of the minis out of the box. So let's use the Grim Forest as a kind of case study without knowing everything behind it. James, if you're on there, want to talk about it, you can hop on. You got a better one.
Because I think
all right.
Did you guys see Hop?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
You want to talk about something that had nothing to do with the game at all?
I use those miniatures for other games.
I use those miniatures for another game too. But literally that game should have been a deck of cards in the rings. To now have a 3-tiered stand with 6 full colored plastic minis that were heavy and about this big. I'm sorry. I think like I'd be like, not Grim Forest. Like I would immediately hit Grim Forest.
Well, I guess, it's to your earlier point. It's a question of blurring the line, and it's like, are you selling a game or are you selling toys that have a game roughly attached to it?
Yep. And I think that's a little bit of both, right? So Grim Forest is a good game. It may be overpriced for what it was, but actually, from talking to James, it was actually underpriced for, what he probably should have priced it at. There's a lot of plastic in that box for the price that you got it for. And I think, I'm just going to pull words out of James's mouth. And James, you can tell me later if I'm right. But I have the impression that he might have done that to make a splash.
It was good looking. It looks good on a table.
It was a loss leader. Just like Gloomhaven for Isaac was the first print run. Yep. Probably barely paid for itself.
And now
it's like number one in everything, right?
Super cult classic, right? So
I
say cult because it's a huge hobby.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I'll happily, point that figure back at myself too. With Thanos Rising, people will say like, did you need to have this,
the giant mini?
Thanos okay, that was a
figure in the middle of the table,
but it was kind of awesome.
Right. So thank you. Right. It does it do anything? It pivots in one of three facings to denote a direction to kind of trigger a little bit of action. That's all it does. But does it create a great table presence? And
it's a clapper and it spins.
Yeah.
There were people who said, "Oh, I want to put it on like." I've seen people like mod it out and put it on like a Lazy Susan base with colors and stuff on the base to kind of give it more presence. So again, that gets back to sort of the kit bashing stuff and elevating your experience by taking what's in the box and customizing it. But to I think a lot of people's point, the table presence, especially when you're going to be playing these games out in social settings, I think is really important to draw other people in. So including what might be superfluous pieces in the actual mechanics of gameplay, but again, elevate that table presence, that experience, draw people in, make it more. Again, I keep saying, but like make it more immersive. That's what people want nowadays. I think they want more ways to kind of trigger the imagination and giving you some crutches to help you along to add to the experience. I think are okay, and it net out as a good thing, even if it does mean our games are going to get a little more expensive.
Yeah.
I was going to say, just as really quick aside that it just occurred to me is that, you know what I mean? Like we're always looking for people who want to play games. And a lot of times, especially cons are a good example of this, where you're going to put out a game and you're hoping people are going to come play with you. There is something about games that have crazy presence that'll actually bring other people to you. And I'm not saying this is a huge factor in why they're made in the first place, but I never really thought about the fact that it's like they could do that though. Like there is a power to that.
Yeah, it's just why do we all prop the game box cover up? We all do it. Why do we do that?
Mm-hmm.
Just to advertise for other people, hey, we're playing this game, come play it. Because a lot of the Euros that we play have nothing on the table other than some board and some cubes, right?
Yeah.
It's a board, and it's a board that's usually of the Mediterranean or Europe or something, right? So, I mean, this is the question I wanted to ask was, are miniatures a hobby or lifestyle?
Guess it depends what you're doing. Well, the idea is like, are you buying a game and you're just tricking it out as part of the fun? Like people do that with, they go to like Meeple Source and things like that, and they get like crazy minis and like screen printed ones now and things like that. Like it's not really different. Or is it more like you're doing it like you have huge minis collections that you're painting? And I feel like there's a bit of a distinctive difference there.
Yep. Oh, for sure. That's what I wondered. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I think it's an easy trap for people to fall into where it starts as a hobby and becomes a lifestyle.
Yeah.
As they get immersed in that sort of subsection of the hobby community. They're definitely the miniatures gamers who take their craft really seriously, and it can become all immersive. I mean, I think of all the different memes that people post out there about not buying more games because I have games that I still need to finish painting and assembling, or not buying, more figures, but it's always sort of chasing after the new, and then realizing you have just scores and scores of boxes and blisters of stuff that you won't even ever get to, and it becomes sort of this endless cycle of trying to keep up.
Yeah. But I think it's a really good connection, kind of everything we've been talking about a bit here, maybe going a little bit away from this last one, but kind of connected to kind of things we're seeing maybe for the future is this idea of when minis or avatar figures might be taking that next step to almost that toy level. And so I think we wanted to kind of maybe, because we got about 10 minutes, it's probably good to start talking about what's happening in the industry around this idea. And so one of the big announcements is that Funko has now bought a publishing company, or I guess merged, bought, what do we say? Bought. They bought.
Acquired.
Acquired.
Acquired. There's the right word.
Well, but in addition, it's sort of dual purpose in that they've announced that Funko is going to get into publishing board games. And in order to facilitate that, they bought a design house that has all those capabilities already baked in, so they don't have to build that from scratch, which sounds like a good way to get into the games industry if you are starting from square one, is to just buy somebody who already knows what they're doing.
Yeah, someone you already have a relationship with, that you're ready to go. And I think that's a really important thing to talk about because, one, whether or not this could become a trend of these idea of these larger, even like toy companies starting to buy up other things and that integration. And then two, what kind of games does that mean? And I'm not talking about licensing. I'm really talking about physical pieces, what that could kind of end up meaning. And I think that's part of it.
Like is the assumption that because it's Funko, they're going to look to get into gaming using their brands that are already familiar with, like the Pop figures, and it's just going to be a Pop figures game? Or are they going to do something different and unique? I guess none of us really know, but I think that makes the most sense because the brand is already sort of ubiquitous. Everybody has a handful of Pop figures, or hundreds or thousands if they're diehard collectors. And wouldn't you be excited about sort of extending the life and use of those figures other than just putting them up on a shelf?
But then their value would go down. I'd have to take
I was going to say, I'm wondering though, okay, just talking a lot from what I saw in Funko's booth at New York Toy Fair. Yes, a lot of the Pop figures are out, but there seems to be a shift in product. So what I'll say is, yes, they're putting Funko onto some new stuff. Like they've got the Pezzes they were showing and things like that. But all of a sudden there's they had just regular product that would license. And again, not just talking about license, but obviously they're stepping a little bit away or kind of coming up with more venues of they have a softened version of the brand trying to create its own plushies now. Then they had the straight up Disney stuff that they were doing, which were backpacks, purses, things like that didn't even have Funko styling. So it could, I don't know, it's just really interesting to think that it's what they might be doing.
We shall see. It's going to be an interesting time. I know I've asked a couple of people what their thoughts are on Funko entering the game space, and no one really knows. But a company that big is sure to be a disruptor to the industry.
Yep, with that much clout and that much name brand recognition, I'm sure we're going to see something interesting.
Yeah.
And knowing the people at Forge Verzan and what they're capable of, they're a talented crew and they understand gaming in a pretty unique way, especially across a lot of licenses. So obviously they're lending their game know-how to the licensing strength that Funko offers, and it's going to be interesting.
Oh, Travis, thank you for posting, because Travis posted this thing way back when, and he said there's a time when most Euros looked like abstract, which were sophisticated and adult, a big riff from the American-style game that looks like toys and were viewed as childish. There's a lot more crossover between those two now than when I was getting into hobby gaming. Okay, so is there, like we talked about before, is there a real link between what we put in the game, the assumed mechanics of that game, or the population, the target audience for that game? Has it shifted over the last little while, or is it still similar? Are there people who will never touch something because there's meeples in it? Are there people who will never touch something because there's plastic in it? What do you think?
I mean, I guess there could be a little bit, what we would maybe affectionately want to refer to being as a little snobbish about your genre. But I feel like that, and I don't mean that affectionately, people, have love for certain things. And we did say there is certain connotations when you see certain pieces come out of a box. But I think it is interesting to say that obviously there is some sort of shift happening, a blend. We're seeing more and more of these blended, what we would have considered more classic European mechanics with something with a twist. You know what I mean? And then maybe that's kind of starting to be reflected in this blend of the materials now, that you have multiple types of figures being represented in maybe more than one way. But maybe it's even going back to just what we were talking about with everything needs that wow factor these days. Like, would just a very average looking Euro be fine, you know, if it wasn't completely tricked out with art? Or would I think we're already trying to look for like that hyper visual anyway, but now we're almost getting into, does it have almost another dimension of visual? And so you are seeing these 3D pieces in what might have been considered classic Euros at one point, but now it's like Euro with a twist.
Yeah, a miniature twist.
To me, and I wonder how many other people have that preconceived notions about, if you hear the word Euro, you probably would never associate minis into the game. You're going to assume it's wood and it might be cubes. Maybe it has meeples, but they're kind of nondescript. It's a lot of card and chip. And there's a particular audience that has an expectation for that, and it has a particular aesthetic. As soon as you start putting things like minis in games, the mechanics might be almost identical to what would be considered a Euro, but no one would call it a Euro anymore.
You know, maybe an interesting. Sorry, go ahead. That's an interesting example.
It's like all of a sudden, then it bleeds over into what I think people would call Ameritrash games, and I think a lot of it just has to do with the execution more so than the actual mechanics.
Well, I'd say Everdale might be a really good example that if you strip that down, that is a straight up just worker placement with, you know, card drafting. In which case, but they threw in the 3D tree and the crazy bits, and all of a sudden you have a very different looking game than what it is at its core. And what became really interesting, actually, funny enough, playing at Gathering, especially like, because I was playing with Andrew and with Sean and T, and Sean and T didn't like it, but you did. And the funny thing is, I think that their expectation on what it looked like to how it played might have been the really big disconnect, whereas I actually think you like the combination of the two.
Yeah, I think so. You think that if it had been kind of more stripped down, a little bit lighter on the theme, not as sort of plussed up with the components, they would have said like, well, this is just a Euro using the same mechanics and not putting all the trappings of the whimsical forest on it. Their expectations would have met with their experience.
Yeah,
I think so. Because again, we talk a lot about look, right? You look at something, you say, it has this pieces, I expect this. It has these pieces, I expect this. And yes, we're going to have some overlap where maybe things do it really well and they don't. And I wonder if that misconception will be an issue for some people, and maybe it'll go away as we blend more. But I think that might be a really good example right there of where it could be a problem.
Yeah, we want to call them like Euro Plus. I say, like, can we call them like Euro Trash? But that has a different meaning.
I know, they already have another meaning for that.
Yeah. But I mean, I agree. I think a lot of the almost over toyification of board games is a pro and a con. So I talked about Gizmos with, I think, Erica at one point, where Gizmos originally was just cards and we played it with just cards, and it was an all right game. I kind of wondered why Eric chose it. But then they put it out and it's doing well, and that's fine. It still has, well, because it has that hopper now, right, with the marble run, and it seems okay. I played it; it's all right-ish still.
I don't know how I feel about that one. I mean, everyone I was playing with
improved it a little bit. It improved it a little bit.
Well, everyone I play with seems to want to love it, and there's a part of me that I think the same thing I was just talking about with Everdale, with what I was seeing the disconnect with other players, was a bit for me where I'm like, oh, I'm programming. Okay. Oh, I'm programming with marbles. Okay.
Yeah, it added, I think we all have a similar experience with Gizmos in that it felt like the marbles and the hopper and the experience was created partially, I think, to reinforce the theme.
It's an old bag pull, kind of.
Yeah, but partially just to kind of separate it from the core mechanics and try and create some points of differentiation. That's right. Those marbles could be cards. You could just draft off of a row. You don't need all of that, but you're trying to create a point of differentiation. And that's what I think a lot of this really comes down to nowadays, is because there's so many games coming out. You have to find something to make your game stand out, even if it's sort of smoke and mirrors. If it looks different, even if it plays the same, whether you're using marbles or cards, it's enough to garner more attention.
So
and that's it.
mechanically, if we're going back to the design of all this kind of stuff, is there a design space where you would pick miniatures over all the rest of the things for an avatar? Combat, okay.
You know what?
Tactical
Again,
combat.
I think it's a like a connotation thing. And so, like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's a big thing with X-Wing too. You're gonna make me be a pilot in space, give me the freaking vehicle. You know what I mean? Like, give me the toy almost. Like, maybe that's actually what it is at this core. Like, you know what I mean? When we're playing with action figures and we were playing like War with G.I. Joe, or playing like cars, like, you know, crazy races with Hot Wheels. Well, it's kind of like minis became the rule-based version of that same type of play.
Oh, for sure.
You know, and maybe
100%.
that's yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. What I've kind of landed upon recently when thinking about games with minis and a tabletop experience and what it is I feel like it's an adult form of when we used to play with, you know, Transformers or G.I. Joes or, you know, Hot Wheels as kids, where we put a rule set on those, and now we've sort of given ourselves permission to do what we did just with our imagination and making things up when we were kids. Because, like, you and I wouldn't sit down and just as two adults.
We might.
Okay, we might, because we're ridiculous. But real life, real people don't do that. No. We're just
right. If you put it in a box with a board and some rules and some other components,
all of a sudden it's legit.
Kind of.
Yeah,
or you're allowed to play it.
Yes,
you're allowed to play it as an adult
because you're entering the magic circle of play, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Is there any rule? Is there any type of game where you wouldn't want a miniature? You say no miniatures at all.
Card game. No, a tile, like some basic tile games where you honestly don't need a mini of any kind to signify it, but there's some chunker in there that shouldn't be there. I don't know.
It's interesting because we're coming up in March. Ooh, just coming up really soon. Our game Simplicity, or well, it's Complexity now, is coming out on Facebook.
That has oxymoronic.
On Kickstarter. And now, because it's about building alien complexes, but it's a simple game. And you know, the Jason Mohan from Big Kid Games, who's listening, is the publisher, and we are literally trying to think of ways. You know, how do we make this more visually appealing to stand out on the table? Because it isn't a very complex game. It's complex in your decision. It's simple in the rules. The rules are like pick up a tile and play the tile. You're done. Those are the rules, right? There's some rules for how you place them and how you score them later, but he really does need for this game to be successful something visual to stand out, something on the box that stands out. So we got Quan-Chi to do the art, which is, something that'll stand out. We got, some 3D models coming in for parts that we don't know if we're going to use them, but we need to try.
That's fair. You'll be lost these days. Like, that's the thing. It's like, don't get me wrong. I really do think there is a big boom in gaming that is happening right now. But at the same time, there's a bit of a hobby glut. And so as that's happening, and it will, I do believe that there's more and more mass that's coming to hobby, and that's going to start to pull things in different directions, or maybe not quite there yet. So then there's a lot of competition for like what could have been a great game might be completely overlooked now because somebody is louder, even if they're not necessarily better, which is kind of a sad thing. I hate to say it's something maybe we're seeing a little bit with certain BGG sets too. What might actually be really fun for the average person doesn't actually most of the time get good numbers on BGG.
Oh, not at all.
Or things that sell really well don't actually normally get good numbers on BGG unless they're that evergreen that costs both barriers. That's the only exception. So it's like, what are they tracking? And so I think that's what it becomes really interesting, right? On that level is like, well, what's the experience versus it looks really great.
Oh, there's a lot of people who will say, even if the game sucks, at least I have 100 new miniatures for my army.
Yeah,
why,
maybe that's
people,
enough.
Well, people ask me all the time. So, what scale should I make my miniatures? It's like 28 to 30 millimeters standard. That's it. Don't make
It's
any
in everyone else's army.
bigger or smaller because that fits in everybody else's armies of every other thing, right? If you want them to be useful outside of your game and have a second life, if your game is no good, or somebody just doesn't like it because they don't like that game,
or a ton of wood, and designers will get it for parts.
It would be great to know. It would be great to know how many people, especially on Kickstarter, who back minis heavy games, actually just want the figures and don't play the game.
I mean, I definitely know people who have done it. So games that have like ridiculous amounts of figures, so like the Conan
like
game,
Ghostbusters,
right, or Ghostbusters. People are just happy to get the figures because they knew they were gonna. Right? Well, no, Kingdom Death is expensive. It's
right, but isn't it? It's all about the figures.
Oh, it is because the game is weird. So I don't particularly like the game. So, but definitely the figures are very interesting. Yeah. So there's a bunch of things that maybe if they had figures they would do better. Maybe if they didn't have figures they'd do better. It's a real.
You know what? You're right. There's games that fall absolutely into both categories. Like I will fully admit, there was one I backed a while back on Kickstarter. I think it was called Orphans or Orphaned something or other, and a big part of it was it looked visually very interesting. The storyline sounded cool. It looked like it would be very thematic. The minis look great, and then you're like, the minis do this, duh, duh.
Yeah, they're just like placeholders, right?
I was like, that's it.
It could have been pawns.
I don't know. And that point, yeah, if the minis mean nothing, like nothing, I wonder. I'll just say this, and I think there's some really cool things we can get to eventually. Like, I don't know if it's going to end up happening in a game I'm working on right now, but I was trying really hard for it. Is one of the ones I'm doing right now. You have physical objects that your characters sort of like throw at each other, and so I wanted to have it so the minis could hold the objects in a certain way. Yeah. Again, we could get into like how minis in production are really problematic and what you can do and can't do and things like that. But it is something that you can start making things more and more interesting. Right. So it still looks like the guys will be in a certain position that the objects will sit the way I want them to, but they may not necessarily be able to hold them the way I wanted them to.
Oh, Jamie Jones is saying that the Son of Anarchy game, which is actually a decent game, is selling well lately because the scale of the motorcycles is perfect for Gaslands. See? So that's that kind of example of what a game comes out as and can be used in another one. I know, like people bought Korra just for the miniatures
because there's no avatar. Like, you know what I mean? Like when there's no product for something and you're a fan, you're just like, oh, thank you for just making that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think we are starting to see a lot of that, especially because of the nostalgia licenses. You know what I mean? Like, I will fully admit that something I'm working on right now could 100% just end up being like a display set on someone's shelf. Yeah. I hope not. Right. I hope not. But I know that's going to happen too, because
when you went to you guys were just at Toy Fair, and I think like 90% of the feeds that I saw from Toy Fair were like He-Man, Masters of the Universe, all these old IP things that people
Beetlejuice is coming back full power right now, guys.
Right? So all these things that are coming back for whatever reason, because it's the 25th anniversary, right? Or the 50th anniversary of this television show about a dog and whatever they have.
TV nostalgia is coming back.
Right?
No, it's okay.
So there's all sorts of stuff about that.
I'm petting Sen, like, secretly. I'm just saying it's okay.
It's okay. Single tear. Okay. There's a lot of cool stuff coming out because of nostalgia. And I think people do want that bust or that miniature or that maquette that isn't the 5,000. I was looking at Aliens versus Predator stuff the other day because doing a thing for something.
As one does.
Yeah, as one does when you're doing research for game design. And there was an alien, the dragon, the dog runner, and like it was like $1,500 for the maquette, right? And it's a big, sizable thing. But imagine people who said, "I really want one, but can't afford it." But then they get a game with it, and it's like a $50 game. oh, I'll spend $50 and get the Warrior
And I get everybody.
and the Predator and whatever, right? So there's some really cool things out there that I think people are going to like, because the quality of miniatures is definitely higher than it ever has been. Is it posable? No. But most of the maquettes aren't posable either. You get to change their hands and their head, maybe, right? Because you can take them on and off.
Yeah. Well, this brings up one. I know we're almost out of time, but it occurred to me. This brings up a really interesting point that is more board game adjacent, but the idea behind the collectible figures, but having game function for like Disney Infinity and the amiibos.
Yeah.
You know, like a lot of people are never going to use those figures in the games, even though they have some in-game function. But there's a huge market for them out there.
I have a box full of Skylanders.
I was gonna say,
outside.
I have some of that stuff too. I have some Skylanders. I have some Disney ones purely because my kids thought they were cool, and we picked them up cheap somewhere. They don't even own the system.
Right. Yeah, I do too. I mean, I've got here. Whoa. I've got these figures. I never played any of the Disney Infinity games.
Is that Kim Possible?
So cool.
It does look like Kim Possible.
No,
Black Widow.
I was like, I'd be so much more impressed if it was Kim Possible.
I was gonna say, how is that Kim Possible?
It looked like it for a second, yes.
So even as gamers and fans of IP, we're all self-admitting that we're buying figures for games and not even using them in the games.
Oh yeah, for sure. It always happens. Always happens. So about the standees, where do you think a standee fits better? Is it just art related? Is it a cost thing?
You know what? I think there's an interesting thing, and maybe this goes back to the nostalgia of playing all those games as kids that had the little standee figures and stuff like that. And I'm gonna say King of Tokyo is a good example of this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'd actually want it to be giant chunky minis. I kind of like the cartoony guys like going around the board, and I don't know. I feel like it suits the feel of it. I almost think I would be upset if it was heavier and like it feels like a cartoon almost at that point, but like in a really fun way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I definitely think there's better technology now. So if you've ever played the games that have the miniatures where they're plastic molded in different colors of plastic. So there's like maybe 3 or 4 parts that they stick together, and then they spot paint parts of it. What was that one? It was a little arena combat game with a big-headed miniatures from France. Remember?
Oh, that sounds familiar. I can't think right now. I got back late from New York yesterday. I have no brain power left.
It's something arena.
Arena for the Gods?
No. That has standees actually.
Yeah.
Like it's those little fat-headed French things, and there's a comic.
I know what you're talking about.
Waifu.
Crossmaster. You're talking about Crossmaster?
Yeah, Crossmasters. Okay, so Crossmaster miniatures. I was sure that because there's definitely people down in the feed that are saying, as soon as it comes to me and it's gray plastic, it just breaks my heart because I'm never going to paint it.
We don't have the skill or time.
Yeah, when Crossmasters came out with their multicolored plastic injection molds, fit them together, little spot paint to look brilliant on the table. You can fix it up if you want. I thought people were going to go crazy over those things. And I guess some people did. But like, imagine if they were that and colored for, IP things.
Oh my God, they'd be like chibi figures ready to go.
Yeah.
Done.
And a lot of people are asking, even on our other new Kickstarter that's coming out for Kingdom Rush, they're saying, oh, are those going to be painted? Because people just want them painted. They want to play right out of the box. And a lot of people aren't into the hobby of painting who are board gamers.
I think if there's a chance that your game could be more accessible mass, something like that, I think it needs to come pre-colored. I think there is a very specific hobby group that would like to paint something. And you know what? Like Andrew even said, people trick out an already painted figure. You know what I mean? So they're willing to do it no matter what. I wonder if it's actually, unless you know what kind of gamer is buying your game specifically, but if it has a more wider possibility of audience, I think you're better off already being colored.
I think there's going to be a large cost increase, of course, but I know
Again,
Travis.
this is assuming cost aside, right?
Yeah, Travis down below was saying that he would have been really unimpressed if Thanos was unpainted.
Oh yeah, they'd been like,
And that
"What
was
the hell? They cheaped out on toys."
And that was never in the cards. Like we always knew that the figure was going to have paint ops. It was a question of like how many paint ops did it have, and how could we do it affordably, but also effective so that it communicated it. I know you're talking about tricking out your figures, and I've got like multiple painted Thanos figures off to the left here, including one that Dave Taylor actually painted for me.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Did you and then like even the miniatures from Samurai Jack were painted as well, right? They came painted.
Yes, and they're really small too. So
Yeah,
I like their size. I like there should be more. I think things like that. It's nice and I don't know. I like them.
It's interesting because like so. Tell us from a production standpoint, if you know, just ballpark, how much more does pre-painting cost?
It can vary from game to game and print run to print run and stuff like that. I think it's often something that the publisher will kind of eat the costs on because they expect that the games will sell better if they come painted. So it's hard to have a hard and fast number for that kind of stuff. I wish it might be the difference between if you have like Samurai Jack has six figures, 6 or 7 figures, I think, and the cost of the figures might have been around I don't know, like $1.50, and there was an extra 50 cents to have them all painted. So and then this is getting all sort of behind the scenes on it, but that idea obviously multiplies out and adds to the cost, and then you have to say, well, what's the highest ceiling we can sell this game, like the kind of game it is and what it's for and who it's for, and are they willing to pay $40 for it if the figures were painted, or would they be happier paying $30 if the figures weren't painted?
Right.
We go back to what we were talking about with Grim Forest. Like it's got a lot of minis that aren't painted. Would people have been happier if they were painted, or do people like the fact that they can paint the figures if they want the option of it?
I don't know.
I think the painting market is maybe, and again, except for depends on the game, but I think the painting market might be the slimmer margin of people on a lot of games that I think they prefer it was done.
I mean, Jamie's saying that right now. He said X-Wing would not have the audience it has if they weren't painted, and I fully believe that.
Absolutely. You would turn a ton of people off. They're like, I have to do what now?
Yeah. Yeah, and Brad Batchelor's saying it's why he used to love the old HeroScape game because it came painted.
Oh yeah.
It's all the HeroClix stuff too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that would have been so annoying if you. Oh my god, like you, especially when they got into all the superhero stuff. You're like, I'm not gonna paint Spider-Man. Like I just want him ready to go.
Yeah, and I mean, there were definitely rules in Warhammer that you could not field an unpainted army, right? So I think some of those old hangovers come along too.
Yeah, well, I think with some publishers, it's sort of baked into their brand, though. Like, I don't think Games Workshop could put out a game with minis that are painted. I don't think they could do it, even though.
But that's because of where they came from, right?
Yeah,
I would expect the minute you said that, you're telling me I'm painting them.
And I mean, Simon probably falls into the same camp. Yeah, do they really have any games with pre-painted figures?
Not yet, but I don't doubt that's coming.
I mean, it might come from like if they have a kids game, right?
I think they'll be. I think there's gonna be certain games that they know their audience for, and those are the people that want minis, and the other ones are gonna start going more mass.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, look at the time. We are 20 minutes over, and we didn't really even talk about designing games with miniatures that much. That can
we sort of talked all around it.
Yeah, we talked around. We can have a more focused conversation some other time about that. If you are interested in letting us know what you'd like to hear us talk about in the future, please go to the Meeple Syrup page. We're right over there, and let us know who you'd like to see on the show, talking about what subjects you'd like to hear about. Next week, we are having John Bridger, who is a developer in California, and we're going to talk to him about his role as a developer. as a freelance developer specifically, and how he has made that his life's ambition, and how he's doing that full time now. So.
And then don't forget to vote for what game we're playing the week after. The poll is up, and Sen will learn how to add more options next time.
There is not. I checked on the Facebook.
There has to be. I've
Nope.
never seen a poll with only 2.
I checked on Facebook on the.
Someone tell Sen how to make a poll with more
And
than
it
2.
said you can only do 2, and this is like as of last month. That's
You
something they've
can-
never fixed.
You could definitely do polls on Facebook that have more options.
Not as
where
your-
people can actually-
Not as your status.
Oh, not as a status, but as a.
I don't know.
as a thread.
Maybe as a group. Maybe in a group post.
Maybe.
I don't know. Maybe if you're a group member, but the group owner can't do it for some reason. I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll figure it out. But yeah, because I've
Okay.
definitely seen things with more than 2 options.
Yeah.
But I was clicking on, there were always 2 options. So yes, and if you know how to make it more than 2 options, that'd be great. Currently what we're doing is we're having an A pool and a B pool. And the winner of the A pool will fight the winner of the B pool, and we'll play that game. And then
So
we'll
it's March-
go to a deep dive about that one.
So it's March Madness, just early.
Yeah, right? It's February.
Game madness.
Frantic February. Yeah. Excellent. All right. So thanks, Andrew, for jumping on at short notice. Thanks, Erica, for
Thank you.
making all the questions. And see, Ming is saying you can only do polls with 2 options if you are a page. You can do polls with more options inside a group. That's what it is.
Ah.
How silly is that? Okay. So thank you, Ming. Maybe we'll poll inside the group next time.
We
And
could
yes,
do
speaking of the group,
both.
right?
Yes. Don't forget to join our group.
Don't forget to join the group, Meeple Syrup Shop Talk, and you'll hear from Zach and Eric as our moderators. So thanks very much for watching. We went way over time, and we'll see you guys next time. Check us out on the Facebook page. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Meeple Syrup Show. If you'd like to support us on all of our projects, please check out our Patreon page. We can be found at www.patreon.com/meeplesyrup. Until next time, make some great games.